first time I saw it, I said, I'm never going to watch this movie again. Hello, welcome to Real Film Snobs. I'm Angela Yeager. I'm really excited again today to bring back Sean Farris to the show. Welcome to the show, Sean.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, so last time Sean was on, we talked about underground animated films, which was on the nose because Sean is a filmmaker with Chop Motion Films and a good friend of mine. And this time we're going in a totally different direction. This was Sean's idea, so I will blame Sean fully if you actually watch any of these films. So to kick off our rainy summer here in Oregon, we've decided to do an episode on feel bad movies. These are Sean has a love of depressing movies. I don't know if I'll say I have a love of it, but I'm definitely not turned away from depressing movies. It doesn't isn't something even during COVID that I've shied away from. So and a lot of let's face it, a lot of the greatest films ever made are really dark and depressing. And a lot of times people complain about that, especially every Oscar season when they're like, "Why aren't there any lighter comedies in here?" Well, in some ways, I think it's because it's harder to make a light comedy. That's actually good, but also life can be pretty dark. So I think you'll see we each picked two movies. And I think you'll see some big differences. I think it's fair to say that Sean's have a little bit more of a comedic touch with some darkness, and mine are just brutal. So, but all of these films are available on streaming, and so we will just kick it right off if you're okay with that, Sean.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so my first pick is Pixote from 1981 by the director Héctor Babenco. It's about a 10-year-old runaway named Pixote who is sent to a youth detention center where he experiences torture and corruption. He befriends a kind of a ragtag group of people, including the trans character Lilica, who is traumatized when her boyfriend is brutally killed by the youth detention center authorities. The film was cast with all real street kids for the most part from Brazil. Think of this as like the pre-City of God, pre-Slumdog Millionaire type of film using real street youth, homeless street youth. But in this case, I would say this is definitely a much darker film than either of those films, particularly Slumdog Millionaire. The boy Fernando Roimos da Silva, who plays Pixote, was a real life runaway who lived on the streets and met a very unfortunate end a little bit later in his life in his 20s. Died at the hands of the police. And so the film, everything you're seeing, while it's a fictional story, is really based on real things that were happening in Brazil in this time, which makes it, I think, a harder watch in a lot of ways. It's almost like a pseudo documentary. This is my second time watching this movie, and it is not an easy movie to watch. I'm curious what you thought, Sean.
I enjoyed it very much. And I'd say no need to apologize. It's definitely very bleak. It's good for our bleak week, as I like to call this.
Yeah,
Um,
Bleak Week. That's another good one. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so this is a kind of a masterpiece of bleakness, I'd say. It's probably, when I talk about liking dark movies or dark themes and all these kinds of things, the comedy is definitely kind of intertwined with a lot of that bleakness. This is probably one movie that didn't make me laugh maybe at any point, but it's a great film. It's very sad. I kind of like that they didn't have any I don't know, phony kind of moralizing going on with it, or sort of these phony redemptive character arcs and things like that. It's kind of just showing this really sad reality and this trickle down kind of effect of the corruption and violence that trickles down to the youth. And yeah, and finding out about the lead actor died at the hands of the police, just if not long, I think maybe what was it, 5 or 7 years after this movie was made, makes it
Mhm.
all the more impact, and all the more real. And like you said, there's almost a documentary aspect to it. Although I feel like I also like there's a lot of really good intentional filmmaking too in it. So
Hmm.
it wasn't just like, the kind of shaky camera stuff you see now where they get a bunch of
Right.
coverage.
No, no,
You have
no.
it
It feels very
together.
much like a film. Yeah.
Yeah, it's artful and complicated and uh, beautiful in its bleakness, I'd say too. But yeah, a
Yeah,
hard watch.
it's a hard watch. It is considered a masterpiece. It won a lot of awards, and it was a very famous film. What happened to the young man in the film actually became a kind of a cautionary story about working with child actors, especially ones who didn't have experience, because Fernando Ramos de Silva tried after this movie to kind of make a go of being a star. I think he works in this film because he's essentially playing himself. He's not a trained actor, so that didn't work out for him. And I don't know, for instance, when Slumdog Millionaire came out, they actually made a point of referencing this film, saying this is not going to happen to the kids in our film. We've set up trust funds for them with the money made from this filming. So, they didn't have those kind of things in place in 1981, but it's often cited. Many, many filmmakers, including Martin Scorsese and others, have cited this as one of the greatest films of all time. So it's definitely, I think, for a film connoisseur, a necessary watch. It is just difficult to watch. As you said, the lack of moralizing, I think, is really what, to me, there's no like trying to tie it up at the end with a happy bow or have some redemptive qualities to really any of the characters. It's just harsh life on the streets as it is. And there's a lot of really interesting characters because he meets different people along the path. It has a bit of an epic arc to it, especially once he leaves the detention center later on in the film. And the film takes like a whole other turn at that point and becomes almost another story, which I thought was interesting. So,
Yes, yeah, yeah. And I appreciated kind of that it was a little bit ahead of its time. Again, we were talking about the trans character of Lilica, and I kind of appreciated uh that was kind of a nuanced and very effective, just the narrative aspect of it with that character as
yeah,
well.
and she's portrayed very sympathetically and
Yeah.
as a true trans character, and I think very, very interesting character in that movie. So, yeah, there's a lot to appreciate about this movie. Just, be warned, especially if you have a hard time watching anything where bad things are happening to children, that this is what this whole movie is about. So,
Yep.
yeah. Okay, so let's move on to your next pick.
My this is probably the most lighthearted of the bunch, I'd say. It's a movie called Love, Liza, directed by Todd Louiso. It tells a story of a web designer named Wilson. He's played by Philip Seymour Hoffman, and he has recently lost his wife to suicide. So he turns to huffing gas fumes to numb his grief and the pain. And so then in the doing of this, he's trying to cover up his tracks for why he always smells like gasoline, and he finds himself pretending to be involved with the RC airplane hobbyist community. And so it kind of leads him on a little bit of adventure in his grief. Um, this is I first this was one of those movies that me and my sister we found in the Hollywood Video. We just thought, oh, Philip Seymour Hoffman, we really liked him from Magnolia and whatnot. And so we rented it, and it's always been stuck with me. And for some reason, I just find it very funny. Um,
It actually
there,
is in parts. I was surprised.
yeah, you wouldn't think a movie about somebody just spiraling down the drain into depression and huffing gas fumes, and his dead wife, all this stuff. But it does have a weird kind of a lightheartedness to it that I can't even quite put my finger on. The obviously the performance by Philip Seymour Hoffman, he was one of the greats, and this is sort of he kind of goes gloomy drama, and then he has these outbursts of kind of craziness, which is sort of funny and comedic, although sad at the same time. Um, anyway, but one another reason I always think of this movie is it kind of introduced me to the music of Jim O'Rourke, who provided some of the music on the soundtrack. But I'm curious to know what you thought of it.
Yeah, I really liked this one. I was surprised. It's not a perfect film. It's got some flaws. I'll get into that in a minute. I actually watched this with my husband, who was mainly interested because he likes Philip Seymour Hoffman, but also is sort of a fan of Jim O'Rourke's music, already familiar with it. And so when I said, "Oh, I started watching it by myself," and then I noticed it said music by Jim O'Rourke, so I said, "Hey, husband, so you like the music by this guy?" And he was like, "Oh," and Philip Seymour Hoffman. So we sat down and watched it. He was worried it was going to be too dark and then was really shocked how funny it was in parts. It is very dark. When you describe the plot, people go, "Oh, a guy, his wife kills herself and then he starts huffing gas." That doesn't sound comedic. But Philip Seymour Hoffman can does these manic areas where, and he also takes his clothes off a lot in this movie. And there's something about just like kind of his naked body running around that's also inherently comedic. Um, but also like the weird things he ends up doing to kind of hide his addiction, if you will, or hide his drug habit, which also becomes funny, like going into the gas store and being like, yeah, it's for my model plane, and how he gets into this world, like you brought up, the whole idea of people like racing these model planes and boats that they've built, and that kind of world he steps into, which is just this sort of like, people that have their niche interests, and he steps into it for all the wrong reasons, but ends up sort of enjoying it on this weird level. I also, one of the things I thought was poignant about the movie is how hard it is for people to connect with people who are going through grief. It's like he is going through something like a tremendous loss, and all these people who do try to reach out to him do so in such an awkward manner a lot of the times, his boss being the worst of all of them.
Yeah.
But everyone, he meets kind of just says when they find out, his wife has died, it's just this like, there's just this awkwardness where people really don't know what to say to him. That some people try to be helpful, but then they end up kind of making things worse, I think, especially in his workplace. We haven't mentioned yet the great Kathy Bates plays his mother-in-law, who is also going through her own grief and trying to connect with him. But then there's just like this weird kind of dynamic with them where they're grieving in different ways and they really don't connect in a lot of ways. So I found that very interesting. But yeah, I was really surprised. That's when I got worried, to be honest, Sean, because I was watching this movie and laughing and thought, oh, I pick movies where you are not going to be laughing at all. So I was a little worried. It is have a really dark sensibility. The themes are dark, and I definitely feel as you get towards the ending, it becomes a little less funny as it goes on. But the some of the things with the friend that he meets who befriends him, the model plane guy, that guy is such a character. Like when he says, "My wife took the bottle opener out of the car. She doesn't like me drinking beer while I'm driving." And then Philip Seymour Hoffman just goes into his house to get the bottle opener. And then the next shot, the way they cut to both of them like drinking beer as they're driving, it was just like, "Oh my God, this is terrible." There are some, areas where I thought, okay, some clumsiness of writing and directing that I just noticed within the screenplay, little things that kind of stood out to me, like at the very beginning, when they call for the obituary ad, they're like, "Do you want us to list that she killed herself?" And I thought, no one, they never do that. That's total. They're just putting that in as a plot point so that you know as the viewer that
Yeah.
that's what happened to her early on, and it was awkward to me. It's just little things like that that I noticed throughout. Do you know much about this director, Sean? Because I didn't, I was not familiar with his work.
The director, I don't know I don't think he's done a whole lot. He made another strange movie that was a very big failure starring Jason Schwartzman called The Mark Pease Experiencer. And it was kind of a
Okay.
strange, and I saw that movie. I kind of liked it too. Everybody hated that movie. But I don't think he's directed a whole lot outside of those two movies. I think he's also an actor himself, and he's done like a lot of bit parts in movies and stuff over the years. And another interesting fact is this movie was written by Philip Seymour Hoffman's brother, Gordy Hoffman, I
Oh,
believe.
really?
Yeah. And so maybe, yeah.
That's pretty interesting. I did not know that. I didn't look up those facts. I did think, I was shocked that there's still Philip Seymour Hoffman movies, especially prominent ones like this that I hadn't seen yet. So I was appreciative of you for turning me onto this film because I miss him dearly in our film world, and every time you see him in a movie, even if it's not a perfect movie, even if it's like I would say this is like a 3.5 star movie for me, you think, oh man, because this movie, I mean, he's in every scene. The whole movie revolves around him, right? And he has to carry this whole movie and take you through those ups and downs, the comedic parts, as well as just the total torturous parts of having a partner that has killed themselves and what that leaves the other person with. And so he captures all of that, I think, perfectly. So
Oh yeah, absolutely. He's phenomenal in this movie. I feel like it's one of his best performances, but it's a weird small movie. Not a lot of people talk about it, and so that's part of the reason why I wanted to choose it for this. But
yeah. And it is easily available. It's free on Amazon Prime. So I would, if people have Prime, I would encourage people to check it out, especially if you're a Philip Seymour Hoffman fan. So,
yes.
okay.
And so the next movie that I chose is a movie called Fat Girl. This is a movie we've both seen before, but it was good to see it again. It's directed by Catherine Breillat. It tells the story of Anais, the title character, and her older sister Elena, who are vacationing with their family. So much of the plot revolves around actually the older sister, and so she's kind of being seduced by this older Italian boy, and he turns out to be not so good. And so then the title character Anais, the quote unquote fat girl, she's kind of disregarded by everybody, and so a lot of the movie you're kind of seeing from her perspective. I don't want to share too much about the plot just because I feel like there's a lot in it that I wouldn't want to spoil, I suppose. A lot of people talk about the ending. It's one of those movies. And I would say the ending is definitely, a bit much, a bit shocking and effective. But there's also a lot of parts that happen earlier on in the movie that are quite a bit disturbing too. Anyhow, so when I first saw this movie, I kind of thought it was going to be sort of like Welcome to the Dollhouse or something. I thought, oh, fat girl, maybe it's a
Like a
movie
coming
just,
of age story type of thing. Yeah.
yeah, like, oh, this poor fat girl and everybody's being mean to her, and she isn't treated very well by her family, but that's not really what the movie's about.
Mm-mm.
So one of the things when I first saw it, the movie kind of stuck with me and I thought about it a lot, and that's part of why I consider it a great movie, is it just made me think. And I'd seen an interview with the director and kind of her take on it, which I found interesting, which was that you have this older, prettier sister who ultimately in the movie is under actually a lot more pressure and kind of goes through a lot. The younger sister, the fat girl, kind of doesn't have to worry about so much because she's just kind of disregarded. But in a way, when people don't have expect much of you or pay much attention to you, there's a little bit of freedom in that and a little bit less
Hmm.
pressure. And so that's not to say that, oh, pretty people have it easier per se, but it just shows kind of the complexity sort of these sisters
Yeah.
and their differences. Um, and another theme in this movie that sort of I found in one of our later movies too has to do with just I guess you'd say intimacy is sort of a theme in this, and just sort of the complexity of that and how difficult it is to have like genuine intimacy between people, whether that's between family members or maybe on a more personal level. Um, but yeah, I'm curious what you think of Fat Girl. We've never really talked about it before.
No, and I had seen it before, but it'd been a while. I think probably when it first came out is when I saw it, or soon after that. Catherine Breillat is a very interesting filmmaker. She's very controversial in France. She's a feminist filmmaker who makes really shocking, in-your-face films. In some ways, Fat Girl is maybe one of her lesser, in terms of at least country. She's made films with, for instance, real sex in them and things that she got, in trouble for. And so she's a very controversial filmmaker and really interesting. This film, watching it a second time, I appreciated the main performances by the two girls even more because they are, they're set up as these opposites, right? The younger, less conventionally attractive sister, the older, more beautiful sister. And then you see this basically what she's doing. The whole film is through her perspective of watching her sister get sexually exploited by this older boy. This film for me is less, it is dark, but it's almost more cringy, if that makes sense. There are scenes where I almost wanted to watch it behind my fingers, because there's a scene where the Italian boy is seducing her sister, and she's in the room. Because one of the things that you didn't mention is that the parents, in order to keep the older daughter out of trouble, they make the younger daughter go with her everywhere she goes. And that doesn't keep her out of trouble. That just makes her an observer to everything her sister's going through because she decides, well, I guess I'm going to try having sex with this boy, but my sister's in the room. And so she is observing everything that her sister is going through. And there's this elements of torn between, revulsion, jealousy, maybe in parts, because her sister is desirable. And she doesn't feel like she is to boys yet. Of course, she is rather young. So that is another thing that makes it very hard to watch. Both of the girls look their age, which I thought makes it hard to watch. Whether they were or not actually those ages, I don't think they probably were based on the explicitness, but they look young. And so that makes it very difficult at times. But I thought the psychology of the younger sister viewing her older sister and seeing what she's going through and how she's being exploited was really fascinating. This also has a few comedic moments at times, mostly with is it a niece, the main the what is her name? The niece, yeah. Well, eating at the dinner table and then people getting on her about her eating. And then her mother at times defending her, saying she's growing still. And then other people, and then later the mother is actually criticizing her too. So there's some kind of like black comedic moments in the movie. Although I would say overall, this isn't, overall not very comedic. You mentioned the big shocking ending, which is, of course, one of the things the film is famous for. But there's also lots of shocking parts before that. So it is definitely not a film for the faint of heart, especially if you like things wrapped up nicely, because I feel like the ending almost brings up more questions. Than it does answers. So I found that really fascinating. It really gets into female roles as someone who is the youngest sister of sisters who were considered much more conventionally attractive than me. There was also elements of it that for me that were just really thought provoking. So I could identify actually in some ways, not with the level, of course, what was going on in this movie, but it is interesting, like it being someone, there is a freedom at times to being seen as less conventionally attractive. And I think that she's really exploring that in a ways that I feel like only a female filmmaker could.
Right. Yeah. If this had been directed by a guy, I don't know. I might feel differently about the movie. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I think if it was directed by a guy, you would also feel like it was more exploitive because there's some pretty
Right.
rough sexual scenes
Oh
in this
yeah.
movie. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
so you would be like really pretty offended. And you're kind of even offended knowing it's directed by a woman, but in
Yeah.
some ways you're like a little bit more forgiving because you're thinking, okay, she's really trying to get at some very disturbing um, some disturbing themes about female sexuality and how women are viewed in our society. And you're watching this boy just completely exploit this young girl, and watching it
Mhm.
unfold in real time is pretty painful at times to watch. So yeah,
Oh yeah.
definitely worth watching. It's on Criterion. They put out the disc of it, and it is available on their channel. I think it's also probably available. I'm not sure if it's available on other streaming services. I know we both watched it on Criterion, but
Yeah.
very thought-provoking film. It was on tons of critics' lists when it came out in 2001, which is one of the reasons I watched it. So yeah, definitely worth it watching. So we'll move on to our last film, which I'm pretty excited to talk to you about because when we were talking about this episode, I said, well, we can't do feel bad movies without an Ingmar Bergman film because he is the master of film buff. He made a career out of feel bad movies. He did make a few comedies in his career, but they are few and far between. And Cries and Whispers from 1972 was my pick because I've seen a lot of Bergman movies. I won't say I've seen all of them because he made a lot. And to me personally, this was one of his most difficult films to process. It is about a woman named Agnes who is slowly dying of cancer in a very torturous way. And her two sisters come to the house to be with her at the end of her life, but they are so immersed in their own issues going on in their own lives that they really pretty much neglect her. And the only one left to care for Agnes is the maid, Anna, who has had her own grief, including the loss of a young child. And she really cares for Agnes and is the only love that she has at the end of her life. Ingmar Bergman, of course, famous for movies like The Seventh Seal and Fanny and Alexander and many others. The master of Swedish filmmaking, was also the master of psychological trauma and exploring those in many facets. It's in his films. Many of them are family situations, mother daughter in a film like Autumn Sonata, many times couples with scenes from a marriage, which was just remade recently because it's such a famous film about a couple who are in the middle of a divorce, just completely tearing each other apart. This one is about, interestingly, and this is why I thought it actually worked well with Fat Girl, this is about siblings. This is about three sisters. And feels amazing performances in this movie from of course the actress he used in almost all of his films, Liv Ullmann, the great Liv Ullmann, and Ingrid Thulman, who I don't have hasn't been in as many as his films, but I thought actually gave the best performance in the film as Karen, who is the harshest sister, the one who is essentially almost allergic to intimacy or touch, just a very, very cold person. And we start to find out more about why she is the way she is. Film is done as kind of a stage piece. It's very theatrical. It's all set in the house where Agnes is dying, this mansion that's very stylized. The whole room is, every room is red. And so, and they kind of, it's almost like a chamber piece is what I would describe it. It's a formal experimentation. I just want to stop talking because I really want to hear what you think about it because I know you haven't seen as much Bergman as I have, and I'm super excited to hear what you thought.
Oh, right. Yeah. And Bergman, that's, I have to confess kind of my sins is, I mean, I love movies, but there's a lot of great movies that I've never seen. and I've only seen one other of his movies, and so I was very excited to start this. My sister's been telling me for years, to watch Fanny and Alexander and these different movies, and I've always intended to, but there's so many movies. Anyhow, and I loved Cries and Whispers. I loved The Red. I kind of there's again it made me think of Fat Girl as well, in that there's this whole question of intimacy, and it's just kind of this elusive thing, and people are just so complicated and fickle that it's like we can't meet each other's basic needs or communicate in a functional way just at all. And that's sort of what you're seeing on display here with the sisters. And there's only the one redeeming character, the maid, who is like
Hmm.
totally taken for granted. And I just felt like that was very true to life. I'm I'm glad they had things wind up that way for her, just because I think too often we'll watch a movie like this and want things to be just kind of tied up nicely, and the good
Yeah,
guys get what they deserve. But as we know, life is rarely like
not like
that.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're obviously very wealthy in there, so there's class issues in there, but Bergman usually doesn't explore that very often in his films. Usually his characters are well-to-do, so that was interesting to me that Anna, this
Mhm.
character who becomes sort of like a mother figure to Agnes, loves her, cradles her at the end of her life, and she gets nothing for that. I mean,
Yeah.
other than her own, I guess, feelings that she did the right thing. The other two sisters, played by Liv Ullmann and Ingrid Thulman, are totally opposite personalities, but actually very similar in a way. They just present it differently. Neither of them are really able to emotionally connect with their sister at all or give her what she needs at the end of the life. They just go about it in a different way. Karen is the one I mentioned that is especially harsh. She's just honestly just completely repulsed by her sister's illness. The thought of pain and things that are icky in life is just like, just she doesn't want anything to do with it. She doesn't want to even think about it. The other sister is acts very sweet and
Yeah.
like, oh, I want to be there for you, but really is kind of faking it. And she's in some ways she's a worse character because at least Karen is upfront about the fact she's emotionally detached, whereas Liv Ullmann's character tries to pretend that
Right.
she's a good person and a good sister, but she's not at all. She's not longer able to be there either.
Hmm. Yeah, and that
So
was that was one part that kind of made me laugh, is at the end when it kind of seems like those two sisters are going to connect, and they're talking and this music swells, and you don't hear what their conversation is, but it seems like they're working through all of their past troubles. But then the rug is pulled out from the one sister at the end, and Liv Ullmann's character kind of takes it all back and just
yeah.
yeah, she winds up being the kind of the most nasty one. And for some reason that kind of thing just makes me chuckle.
Right. Well, that's
Yeah.
where you think, oh, you think for a minute, he's gonna tie it up in a bow. He's gonna have these sisters kind of reconcile. And no, no, it's never that easy in Ingmar Bergman's world. You and I will have to talk offline when the show's over. I have many recommendations for you with his films. For me, maybe again, it's that theme of sisters. I loved the formal look of the film. The film won the Best Cinematography Oscar for that year, and it was nominated for Best Picture and Best Director, which is really hard to imagine in the year 2022 that this movie that is pretty experimental in some ways actually was nominated for Best Picture. So it was a hit for Bergman and it was very acclaimed when it came out. So I really highly recommend it. Again, it's a unforgiving 90-minute psychodrama. It's short, but it pulls a punch. So
Oh, it certainly does.
yeah, so this was a great feel bad or bleak week episode, as you put it, Sean. I love that bleak week. I hope you come back on. We'll have to give people some more fun things to look forward to for the next time you're on.
Yes.
Maybe we'll do comedies, who knows? Or maybe we'll just do dark comedies. That would be kind of fun.
There.
So, as always, you can go to our website at realfilmsnobs.com. We're on YouTube, CC Media. We have a podcast. You should check it out. We're on Scan TV and Silverton Corvallis Access Media, all sorts of radio stations. As always, thank you very much. Have a great day and great movies. Goodbye.